Welcome back to another update video on DAAD Builder. There's been one change to the font editor. So previously we were looking at the fact you can have the Spectrum fonts, which are 127 characters, or you can have the full 256 font. When we import, it was just importing into the characters at the top, the first 128 characters in the top of the font table. Now when we import, we can choose whether it goes into the top. If I choose font there, it'll now ask if you want to import that into font bank 1 or font bank 2, and you can change between these banks within your DSF file by using the escape codes G and T to swap to using the top bank or the lower bank. Just makes it a little bit more useful. Something else that came off the back of that last video was me saying the DAAD Builder will export your custom fonts, but you need to edit the config file to be able to use those. The config file has always been a slight wrinkle with me when I first started using DAAD. My initial thing was, well, how do I change the name of my adventure? It was always called test.dsf, and whenever I compiled the adventure it'd show up in the Spectrum tap file as test. I didn't really like that. I'd have liked to have seen the name of my adventure in there. So now we can edit the config file. If we go to settings for our project, we can now choose to use a custom config file. In that we can choose to use custom fonts, so it will export the font that you've added in your project and it will automatically use that when you compile. You can also use custom game name, which will use whatever name you've used for your project or the first 8 letters of whatever you've named your project. And then you have the other config settings like split screen, high res mode, and to use custom image height as well. If you tick that, you can now define the default with DAAD Ready is 96 lines of the picture from the top. You can now change that to be whatever you want your custom picture size to be, and that will edit this config file that comes with DAAD Ready. It won't change the top line, which checks for the new versions of DAAD Ready, but it will change the names of the fonts, the 6x8, the 8x8, and the one used by the Commodore to be whatever your custom fonts are. We don't yet support the PC font format, but that is only that one target. It will change the name of your game here to be whatever, or the first 8 letters of whatever your adventure name is, and then also change the settings like split screen, image lines, high res, and it'll also change the language file to match. So if you've chosen that you're generating a Spanish adventure, it will change the language here to match, and also for the Portuguese, German or French or English versions. So one of the questions I was asked early on, did a bit of a nasty hack just to display the graphics you've got in your graphics editor. We basically just said we're going to display the first 96 lines, a bit like DAAD Ready does, and then we'll put the text underneath. It was just really a hack to be able to get to see what your picture looked like, but there are a number of things we hadn't implemented, such as windows, resizing your windows, which window the text output goes to and which is a graphics window. All of those kind of things were all just stubs in our code. Now change that to more properly support windows the way that DAAD does. It's not entirely correct yet, our code. There's a few things that I'm unclear on, such as whether the windows have a Z order, whether Windows 0 is at the bottom and all the other number windows stack on top of each other. I'm thinking something like that must happen because in the DSF file the image window is set to full size, and then the text window is set to be lines 13 downwards, and that covers up that image window. I was initially thinking that the image window was cropped to 96 lines. I think it shows that the whole thing. So I'm still a little bit unclear on that, and there may be changes to the code as it becomes more clear what the original interpreters were doing. So when we go to test our adventure, go to our first location, the image is now larger than it was before. It's now scaled to match the text, and here we're showing the first 96 lines. But if we go into our text editor and we jump down to process 0, the text window is set here at the top to start at line 13. If we now make that line 20 instead and go back to test adventure, we now have a much larger picture with the text at the bottom. So we can now show as much of the picture or as little as the picture as you want by supporting those windows. So that's another step, I think, in the right direction. So off the back of implementing those Windows contacts, we now support Window, WINSIZE, WINAT, should support PRINTAT and TAB. Discovered actually our skip had never been working properly. We were never reading the labels in for skip. So it was only by implementing those windows and taking out our hack that we discovered this section, which should have been skipped, was actually displaying. So we've now fixed skip and the labels used to skip. So that should all work properly. For debugging that, we've added another section here in our debug window, which is now called Windows. It will show if we found a picture for this location. So we're on location 0. There was no picture found for this location. Let's move to location 1, go to our debug window, and it loaded a picture for that. So if our pictures aren't showing up, we can now start diagnosing perhaps why not. Has the system not found a picture? Has it found a picture and it's not showing up, in which case there's another bug. It also shows the skip labels here that it's found within the DSF file. So we can see there's one in process 0, which is the one which checks to see if we have a picture. If we don't have a picture, it skips the window resizing when you get a full size text window. And there's also the one at the bottom, the init loop in process 6, which, because we were by default setting all flags to 0, had never really noticed that init loop wasn't running. And then we have the windows themselves. Windows 0, which is set to full screen in the code earlier in the DSF. Window 1, which is our text window, starts at line 13, column 0, and this is its current height and width. So again, that should help a little bit for debugging when things are going wrong with Windows. I think that's it for the updates over this weekend. There's a few more things we want to do. The next thing I would quite like to look at, now we have the font editor, is being able to use some of these empty fonts, being able to use those in the graphics editor as a custom brush. So when we have our dither patterns here, we'll have one which we can select one of those fonts from, and we can use that as a custom dither. Would be quite a nice feature, and also will tie in with something else that I want to be working on further down the line. Talking about the window changes, we haven't yet implemented paper color or ink color. I don't think we'll support border color. I mean, potentially we could fill the whole area of the window that's not the text window or the graphics window with the border color. It might look a little bit strange. I'm not sure if we really need to support that or not. We'll see further down the line. But paper and ink we certainly will need to implement, so we can change the color of our font going on. but I need to look a little bit further at how DAAD handled that, because it didn't just use the normal numbering I think that the Spectrum would have had or the Commodore would have had. I think it had its own way of laying out the colours in the database, so I need to look at that more before we go any further. But for the moment, that is it, and that's the current updates. I will see you in the next video.